Maria Santos had always been invisible in the best possible way. For 12 years, she worked the night shift at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, monitoring radio frequencies that most people didn't even know existed. While fighter pilots got the glory and transport crews got the recognition, Maria sat in a windowless room filled with glowing screens and crackling speakers, listening to the voices that kept the skies safe. Her colleagues often forgot she was there. The radio operator who worked the day shift barely acknowledged her when they switched places each evening. The commanding officers knew her name from paperwork, but rarely spoke to her directly. Even her own family back in Texas sometimes forgot what exactly she did for the Air Force. Something with radios. Her mother would tell neighbors when they asked about her daughter overseas. Maria didn't mind the anonymity. She had joined the Air Force not for fame or recognition, but because she genuinely loved the work. There was something deeply satisfying about being the unseen guardian, the voice in the darkness that pilots could count on when everything else went wrong. She had memorized every emergency frequency, every call sign, and every protocol. Her supervisors trusted her completely, which was why they let her work the overnight shifts alone, while others required partners. The night that changed everything started like any other. It was December 15th, and a harsh winter storm was moving across Central Europe. Most routine flights had been grounded, but military operations never completely stopped. Maria settled into her chair at 11 p.m., adjusting her headset and checking the weather reports. The storm was expected to worsen overnight, with heavy snow and dangerous wind conditions. Around 1 a.m., she heard the first distress call. It was faint, almost lost in the static caused by the storm. Most operators might have dismissed it as interference, but Maria had trained her ear over thousands of hours. She immediately began adjusting frequencies and boosting signal strength. The voice became clearer, though still broken by atmospheric disturbance. Mayday, Mayday. This is Ghost Rider 77. Engine failure. Attempting emergency landing. Weather conditions severe. Request immediate assistance. Maria's heart began racing, but her hands remained steady as she responded with practiced calm. Ghost Rider 77. This is Ramstein Control. I copy your Mayday. Please state your current position and fuel status. The response came back weak and intermittent. The pilot was flying an F-16 fighter jet on a routine training mission when his engine suddenly failed during the storm. He was somewhere over the German countryside, but the storm was interfering with his navigation systems. Worse, his radio was damaged, making communication nearly impossible. Maria knew that in weather like this, without proper guidance, the pilot would never find a safe place to land. Military jets weren't designed to glide for long distances, and ejecting over a populated area during a snowstorm could be deadly for both the pilot and anyone on the ground below. She began working multiple frequencies simultaneously, something she had trained for but never had to do in a real emergency. With one hand, she contacted the Rescue Coordination Center to alert them of the situation. With the other, she started plotting possible landing sites based on the pilot's last known position and the weather patterns. The problem was that Ghost Rider 77's radio was getting weaker. Each transmission was fainter than the last, and Maria realized she was probably the only person who could still hear him. The storm was creating a communication dead zone, and somehow her equipment was just powerful enough to maintain the connection. For the next hour, Maria became the lifeline between the struggling pilot and the rest of the world. She coordinated with emergency services, provided weather updates, and most importantly, kept talking to the pilot to prevent him from panicking. She could hear the strain in his voice as he fought to control his damaged aircraft in the brutal weather conditions. Ramstein Control. I can't see anything down here. Everything is white. My instruments are going crazy. The pilot radioed during one of his clearer transmissions. Ghost Rider 77, I understand. I'm tracking the storm patterns here. In approximately 2 minutes, you should see a break in the clouds to your northwest. There's a small airfield about 15 miles in that direction. Maria was making split-second decisions based on weather data, topographical maps, and her deep understanding of aircraft capabilities. She had never guided a damaged fighter jet to an emergency landing, but she understood the principles. More importantly, she could hear something in the pilot's voice that told her he was starting to lose hope. "Listen to me, Ghost Rider," she said, abandoning formal radio protocol. "You're going to make it through this. I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I've never lost anyone yet. Just follow my voice and trust the instruments that are still working." What Maria didn't know was that Ghost Rider 77 was being flown by Captain James Mitchell, a decorated pilot with over 500 combat hours. He later said that hearing the confidence in Maria's voice was what kept him from ejecting too early. Something about her calm professionalism made him believe that she knew exactly what she was doing, even when he couldn't see a way out. As the night wore on, Maria guided the pilot through one of the most challenging emergency landings in recent Air Force history. She had to calculate wind speeds, visibility conditions, and fuel consumption while maintaining constant communication through increasingly difficult atmospheric interference. By 4 a.m., both she and the pilot were exhausted, but they had managed to locate a suitable landing strip. The emergency landing was successful, though barely. Captain Mitchell touched down at a small German airfield, with less than 5 minutes of fuel remaining and no visibility beyond his aircraft's nose. It was only after he had safely stopped on the runway that he realized he never got the name of the radio operator who had saved his life. When the sun rose that morning, Maria completed her incident report and went home to her small apartment near the base. She didn't mention the night's events to anyone. In her mind, she had simply done her job the way she was trained to do it. The fact that she had saved a pilot's life was just part of what radio operators were supposed to do. For weeks afterward, life returned to normal. Maria continued working her night shifts, monitoring the same frequencies, maintaining the same professional standards. She never heard back from Ghost Rider 77, which wasn't unusual. Pilots often moved on to different assignments, and there was rarely follow-up contact after emergency situations were resolved. What Maria didn't realize was that Captain Mitchell had been trying to track her down ever since his emergency landing. Military bureaucracy made it difficult to identify specific personnel involved in radio operations, especially when the incident occurred during overnight shifts with minimal supervision. He knew her voice, her call sign, and her professional competence, but he didn't know her name or how to find her. 3 months passed before Captain Mitchell finally found a way to track down the radio operator who had saved his life. He had submitted multiple requests through official channels, but military record systems weren't designed to easily identify individual radio operators from emergency transcripts. Most incident reports focused on aircraft damage, landing procedures, and medical status, rather than the specific personnel who provided ground support. Meanwhile, Maria continued her quiet work at Ramstein. She had handled several more emergency situations since that December night, but none as dramatic as the fighter jet in the storm. Her supervisors had noticed her exceptional performance and were considering her for a commendation, though they hadn't yet informed her of their plans. The breakthrough came when Captain Mitchell was transferred to Ramstein Air Base for a training assignment. He specifically requested the posting because he knew this was where his emergency support had originated. On his first day, he visited the radio operations center and spoke with the shift supervisor. "I'm looking for whoever was working radio control on the night of December 15th, Captain Mitchell explained. "There was an emergency landing situation, and I'd like to thank the operator who helped me." The supervisor, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, immediately knew who he was talking about. That would be Staff Sergeant Santos. "She works nights, comes in at 11 p.m. Exceptional operator, one of the best we've ever had. She probably doesn't even remember the incident, though. She handles situations like that all the time." Captain Mitchell was surprised to learn that his life-threatening emergency was considered routine for the radio operator. He decided to wait until that evening to meet her, wanting to thank her in person during her actual work environment. When Maria arrived for her shift that night, she found Captain Mitchell waiting in the radio room with Master Sergeant Rodriguez. She recognized the call sign immediately when introductions were made, but she was genuinely confused about why he wanted to see her. "Staff Sergeant Santos, this is Captain Mitchell. He was flying Ghost Rider 77 back in December," Rodriguez explained. Maria nodded politely. "Yes, sir. I remember the emergency landing. I hope everything worked out well for you." Captain Mitchell stared at her for a moment, trying to reconcile the calm, professional woman in front of him with the voice that had guided him through the worst night of his flying career. "Staff Sergeant, I don't think you understand. You saved my life that night. Without your guidance, I never would have found that airfield. I've been trying to track you down for months, just to say thank you." The conversation that followed revealed something remarkable about Maria's approach to her work. She genuinely didn't consider her actions during the December emergency to be anything extraordinary. In her mind, she had followed standard procedures and applied her training to help a pilot in distress. The fact that the situation was life-threatening and required exceptional skill didn't occur to her as noteworthy. "It's just radio work," she told Captain Mitchell. "You follow the protocols, you stay calm, and you help people get where they need to go. I've done hundreds of emergency assists over the years." This response stunned both Captain Mitchell and Master Sergeant Rodriguez. They began asking Maria about other emergency situations she had handled, and discovered that she had been involved in far more dramatic rescues than anyone realized. She had guided medical evacuation flights through dangerous weather, helped lost cargo planes find alternate landing sites, and coordinated complex search and rescue operations. In every case, she had filed her standard reports and moved on to the next shift without considering her actions particularly remarkable. Captain Mitchell realized that he had stumbled upon something much larger than his own rescue story. Maria Santos wasn't just a competent radio operator who had helped him during one emergency. She was someone who had been quietly saving lives and preventing disasters for over a decade, without anyone fully recognizing the scope of her contributions. He began investigating further, reviewing incident reports, and talking to other pilots who had flown missions supported by Ramstein radio operations. What he discovered was extraordinary. Maria had been involved in dozens of emergency situations that could have ended in tragedy if not for her expert intervention. Pilots throughout the European theater knew her voice and trusted her guidance. But most had never learned her name. The more Captain Mitchell learned, the more frustrated he became with the military's failure to recognize Maria's exceptional service. Radio operators rarely received commendations because their work was considered support rather than direct action. The system was designed to reward visible heroism rather than the quiet competence that prevented emergencies from becoming disasters. Captain Mitchell decided to do something about this oversight. He began documenting every emergency situation where Maria had provided crucial support. He interviewed pilots, reviewed radio transcripts, and compiled evidence of her exceptional performance over 12 years of service. His goal was to nominate her for the Air Force Commendation Medal, one of the highest honors available for non-combat service. The nomination process was complicated. Military awards typically required witness statements, documented evidence of specific heroic actions, and support from multiple levels of command. Maria's work didn't fit the standard categories because her heroism was cumulative rather than based on a single dramatic incident. However, Captain Mitchell's investigation had uncovered something remarkable. Over her career, Maria had been directly involved in emergency situations that saved an estimated 43 lives and prevented millions of dollars in aircraft losses. Her expertise had guided pilots through mechanical failures, weather emergencies, navigation problems, and medical crises. She had prevented mid-air collisions, coordinated complex rescue operations, and maintained communications during some of the most challenging conditions possible. What made her case even more compelling was that she had accomplished all of this while working largely alone on overnight shifts. Most emergency situations occurred during her watch because that's when training flights encountered unexpected problems, when weather conditions were most unpredictable, and when backup support systems were minimal. Captain Mitchell's nomination package grew to over 200 pages of documentation. He included radio transcripts, pilot testimony, incident reports, and detailed analysis of Maria's decision-making during critical situations. He demonstrated that her actions had prevented multiple potential disasters and saved lives in ways that went far beyond normal job requirements. The nomination faced resistance from some quarters of the military bureaucracy. Awards committees were uncomfortable with recognizing someone whose heroism was quiet and technical, rather than dramatic and visible. Some officials questioned whether radio operations, no matter how expert, qualified as the type of exceptional service that merited major commendations. Captain Mitchell persisted, enlisting support from other pilots who had benefited from Maria's expertise. He collected statements from commanders who recognized her value, and from technical specialists who could explain the complexity of her work to non-experts. Gradually, he built a case that even skeptical officials couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Maria remained completely unaware of Captain Mitchell's efforts on her behalf. She continued working her night shifts, handling emergency situations with the same quiet competence she had always shown. Her supervisors noticed that she seemed to be receiving more attention from visiting personnel, but they didn't explain the reason for the increased interest in her work. The turning point came when a general who had previously been skeptical of the nomination package experienced an emergency situation himself. His transport aircraft developed mechanical problems during a storm, and Maria guided the flight to a safe emergency landing at an alternate airfield. The general later said that experiencing her professional expertise firsthand made him understand why Captain Mitchell considered her worthy of recognition. After 8 months of bureaucratic processing, the nomination was approved. The Air Force decided to award Maria the Air Force Commendation Medal, along with a promotion to technical sergeant. The citation would recognize her 12 years of exceptional service and her role in saving multiple lives through expert radio operations. The morning Maria learned about the commendation was unlike any other in her 12-year Air Force career. Master Sergeant Rodriguez called her at home, interrupting her usual post-shift sleep, and asked her to come in for an important meeting. She assumed there was a scheduling problem, or perhaps a new emergency protocol to discuss. When she arrived at the base, she found herself directed not to the Radio Operations Center, but to the main conference room in the administrative building. This was unusual enough to make her nervous. Radio operators rarely had meetings in formal conference rooms, and Maria couldn't think of any reason she would be summoned there. The room was filled with people she didn't recognize. There were officers from various commands, a photographer, and several civilians who appeared to be from the base public affairs office. Captain Mitchell was there, wearing his dress uniform instead of flight gear. Master Sergeant Rodriguez gestured for her to take a seat at the front of the room. Colonel Patricia Williams, the base commander, stood up and began reading from an official document. Maria listened in, growing amazement as she heard her own actions described in formal military language that made them sound far more dramatic than she remembered. The citation mentioned specific emergency situations, quantified lives saved, and used phrases like exceptional technical expertise and extraordinary dedication to duty. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, for exceptionally meritorious service as radio operations specialist at Ramstein Air Base from 2011 to 2023. Through her expert technical knowledge and unwavering professionalism, Staff Sergeant Santos provided critical radio support during 47 documented emergency situations, directly saving 43 lives and preventing catastrophic aircraft losses valued at over $60 million. The citation continued for several minutes, detailing accomplishments that Maria had never considered worthy of special recognition. She learned that her guidance during the December storm had been just one of many situations where her expertise had prevented potential tragedies. The formal language made her work sound heroic in ways that confused and embarrassed her. When Colonel Williams finished reading the citation, she pinned the Air Force Commendation Medal to Maria's uniform and announced her promotion to technical sergeant. The room erupted in applause, and Maria found herself surrounded by people congratulating her for achievements she still didn't fully understand. Captain Mitchell approached her during the reception that followed the ceremony. "Do you understand now why I've been working so hard to make this happen?" he asked. Maria shook her head. "I still don't get it, sir. I was just doing my job. Everyone in radio operations handles emergency calls." "No, they don't," Captain Mitchell replied firmly. "I've talked to dozens of pilots over the past year. Most radio operators follow basic procedures and hand off complex situations to supervisors or emergency response teams. You make split-second decisions that save lives. You stay calm under pressure that would break other people. You turn potential disasters into successful outcomes through pure expertise and determination." The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Williams, who wanted to discuss Maria's future with the Air Force. The publicity surrounding her commendation had attracted attention from senior leadership, and there were opportunities for advancement that had never been available to her before. "Technical Sergeant Santos, we'd like to offer you a position developing emergency communication protocols at Air Force Headquarters. Your expertise could help train the next generation of radio operators and improve emergency response procedures throughout the service. Maria was overwhelmed by the sudden attention and the career opportunities that seemed to be opening up. For 12 years, she had worked quietly in the background, content with her anonymous but important role. Now she was being offered a chance to shape policy and influence training programs on a much larger scale. However, as the ceremony concluded and the crowds dispersed, Maria found herself thinking about the night shift that would begin in a few hours. Someone else would be covering her usual position while she attended the ceremony, but she knew that pilots somewhere in the European theater might need guidance tonight. The idea of leaving her post for a headquarters position felt wrong. Despite the honor and advancement it represented, she asked Colonel Williams if she could have time to consider the headquarters offer. She wanted to return to her usual duties and think about what kind of career would actually fulfill her. The recognition was gratifying, but it had also made her realize something important about herself and her work. That night, Maria returned to her familiar position in the radio operations center. Her equipment was the same, the frequencies were the same, and the quiet professionalism of the work was exactly what she had always valued. The difference was that now she understood how rare her particular combination of skills and dedication really was. Around 2 a.m., she received an emergency call from a cargo aircraft experiencing hydraulic problems over Belgium. As she began coordinating the emergency response and guiding the pilot toward a safe landing, Maria realized that this was exactly where she belonged. The headquarters position might offer more prestige and better career advancement, but the work that truly mattered was happening right here, in this windowless room, during overnight emergencies that tested her expertise. Over the following weeks, word of Maria's commendation spread throughout the Air Force radio operations community. Young operators began requesting assignments to Ramstein, specifically to learn from her. Training programs started incorporating case studies based on her emergency responses. She became an unofficial mentor to operators throughout the European theater, sharing techniques and approaches that had taken her years to develop. The transformation was gradual but profound. Maria remained in her radio operations position, but her role expanded to include training responsibilities and protocol development. She worked with Captain Mitchell and other pilots to create new emergency communication procedures based on her real-world experience. Her insights helped improve coordination between radio operators and flight crews during crisis situations. More importantly, the recognition changed how the Air Force viewed radio operations in general. Maria's commendation demonstrated that technical specialists could have direct, measurable impact on mission success and life-saving operations. Other radio operators throughout the service began receiving more attention and support for their professional development. Captain Mitchell's original goal had been simply to thank the radio operator who saved his life. His investigation had uncovered something much more significant. A dedicated professional whose quiet excellence had been invisible to a system designed to recognize more dramatic forms of heroism. By bringing Maria's achievements to light, he had changed how the military valued and supported the technical specialists who kept complex operations running safely. 5 years later, Technical Sergeant Santos was still working night shifts at Ramstein Air Base. She had turned down 3 offers for headquarters positions, preferring to remain where she could have direct impact on emergency situations. However, her influence had spread far beyond her individual radio operations. Training programs throughout the Air Force now incorporated her approaches to emergency communication, and hundreds of radio operators had learned from her expertise. Captain Mitchell, now a major, remained stationed at Ramstein and continued to fly training missions over European airspace. Sometimes, during routine flights, he would check in with radio control just to hear Maria's voice, providing the calm, professional guidance that had become legendary among pilots in the theater. The most significant change was in Maria herself. She still considered radio operations to be simply her job, but she now understood that doing her job exceptionally well had profound impact on other people's lives. The recognition hadn't made her work more important, but it had made her more aware of why that work mattered. On quiet nights, when emergency calls were infrequent and the radio frequencies carried only routine traffic, Maria sometimes reflected on the unexpected journey from anonymous night shift operator to decorated Air Force hero. The medal and the promotion were meaningful, But the real satisfaction came from knowing that her voice in the darkness continued to guide pilots safely home. One emergency at a time, her story became part of Air Force culture, told to new radio operators as an example of how technical excellence and dedicated service could make the difference between life and death. She never sought the recognition, never promoted her own achievements, and never considered herself particularly heroic. But for the 43 people whose lives she saved, and for the countless others who flew more safely because of the standards she set, Maria Santos represented the very best of quiet, professional heroism that keeps military operations running successfully around the world.